Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. The Supreme Court has directed the J&K government to answer every question related to the restrictions that have been placed in Jammu and Kashmir. See, the Supreme Court has started to look at a bunch of petitions that were filed after the special status of J&K was revoked. These petitions have challenged the constitutionality of the revocation of special status of J&K under Article 370. Some of the petitions have challenged the restrictions that have been placed on communication and internet services and the right of movement of people. A few petitions have challenged the preventive detentions that were carried out before the special status was revoked. The petitions have mainly challenged the political detentions. And a few petitions have even challenged the manner in which J&K was bifurcated. So now the Supreme Court has begun to look into all these petitions and it has clubbed them together. In the initial hearings itself, the Supreme Court has directed the J&K government and the centre to address every question that has been raised by the petitioners. In response to these questions, the Solicitor General and the Attorney General who are representing the government, they have replied that the situation has been beautifully handled by the government and as a result, there has been no loss of life in J&K since the 5th of August. They have informed the Supreme Court that Section 144, which had been placed in J&K and Ladakh, has been removed from all the police stations and violent incidents, protests and stone pelting incidents have declined because of the precautionary measures that were taken by the government. So essentially, the government has justified that these harsh restrictions on communication services and internet and movement and these preventive detentions were necessary in the interests of national security and public order. The government has claimed in the Supreme Court that normalcy is being restored in Jammu and Kashmir and it has cited the gradual relaxation of curbs as evidence for this. It has informed the Supreme Court that basic services are being restored in a gradual incremental manner. For example, schools, hospitals, medical centers, etc. have started functioning. Communication services such as landline phones, prepaid and postpaid phones have been reactivated. But despite these claims of the government, the Supreme Court will be looking into the constitutionality and the legality of these decisions. And the petitioners have drawn a very interesting comparison between the situation in Jammu and Kashmir and the ongoing protests in Hong Kong. See, by drawing this comparison, the petitioners are trying to highlight the role of the judiciary in upholding the rights of the citizens. In Hong Kong, the authorities had imposed a ban on the usage of face masks during protests. But the Hong Kong High Court had declared this ban as unconstitutional even though the protests had turned violent. So basically, the petitioners in India are urging the Supreme Court to uphold the rights of the people in Jammu and Kashmir by considering the fact that the protests in J&K have not turned violent since the 5th of August. Another interesting development in the case is that the government has claimed that there has been no financial loss in J&K due to these decisions. The government has claimed that even a farmer has not lost a single penny. But this claim of the government may not be sustainable because a number of reports indicate that the financial losses in Jammu and Kashmir could amount to at least $1 billion as a direct consequence of these decisions. We even have another article on page number 1 to justify this. According to this article, Bharti Airtel alone has lost around 3 million subscribers in Jammu and Kashmir because of the restrictions on communication and internet. So the bottom line is that these ongoing cases of the Supreme Court are going to be very important. And we shall keep track of these cases as and when they appear in the newspaper. Now let's take up an article from page number 5. Avian botulism has been identified as the reason behind the death of thousands of birds at the Sambhar Lake. See, over the last few weeks, thousands of birds have dropped dead at the Sambhar Lake. The Sambhar Lake is one of the most critical habitats for migratory birds and water birds. These migratory birds come from as far as Central Asia, Siberia, and Europe, and thousands of them had mysteriously started to die. Initially, experts believed that avian flu could be the reason behind these mass death of birds at the Sambhar Lake. But laboratory testing has confirmed that avian flu is not the reason, and instead it is caused by avian botulism. So these findings have been confirmed by the Indian Veterinary Research Institute. So in this context, let us talk about avian botulism, which can be very important for prelims. See, avian botulism is a type of a paralytic disease that is caused by a neurotoxin. This neurotoxin is known as botulinum neurotoxin, and it is abbreviated as BONT. This neurotoxin is produced by a strain of bacteria known as Clostridium botulinum. So when such a neurotoxin producing bacteria infects a bird, it can paralyze its neurons and muscular tissue. This will eventually result in the death of the bird as well. See, this particular strain of botulism is particularly known to affect wild and captive birds, especially waterfowl. See, there is another strain of this neurotoxin which is produced by the same bacteria that can cause botulism in human beings as well. In this case, it will have the same effect. Since it is a neurotoxin, it will lead to paralysis and eventual death of the patient. But the strain that has been reported at the Sambhar Lake is avian botulism, which means it will affect only birds, especially waterfowl. This strain of bacteria is known to thrive in water bodies which have low oxygen and high protein available substrates. So as a result, water bodies which are shallow and stagnant, they are more vulnerable to report the presence of Clostridium botulinum. Even water bodies which are highly polluted, even they could be vulnerable because polluted water bodies tend to have low oxygen content and high organic matter. Now let us talk about the transmission of the disease. See, avian botulism is not contagious amongst birds. This means that it does not spread from one bird to another. So the question is, how are these birds getting infected? See, the birds are getting infected through maggots. A maggot is nothing but the larva of a fly which feeds on rotten and dead organic matter. These maggots act as the host for the neurotoxin, and when they are consumed by the birds, that's when the birds are getting infected. Now let us talk about the treatment and the preventive measures for this disease, considering the impact it can have on threatened species of birds. See, there are vaccines available which can prevent this disease, but it is practically impossible to administer the vaccine to wild migratory birds. So these vaccines are not really effective in preventing an outbreak. So the best preventive measure would be to monitor the wetlands and water bodies which are vulnerable to this bacteria. Once you identify such ecosystems, you need to maintain a high state of surveillance, especially during the migratory season. And as soon as there is an outbreak, vaccines and treatments could be administered at least to the threatened species of birds, considering their ecological significance. Such measures have already been taken at the Sambhar Lake, and a few thousand birds have already been treated. Now let's take up an editorial from page number 10, which evaluates the recent decision of the Union Cabinet to disinvest its shareholding in 5 public sector companies, including BPCL, the Shipping Corporation of India, and the Container Corporation of India, etc., in order to raise revenue. The editorial calls this decision as an expedient exit, and it is only a stopgap measure to bridge the increasing fiscal deficit. So let us understand this argument in greater detail. See, a couple of days ago, the Union Cabinet decided to carry out a strategic disinvestment in these public sector units. It has approved the selling of all the government shares in BPCL and the Shipping Corporation of India. It has approved the selling of around 30% of the government shares in the Container Corporation of India. So we need to understand what is disinvestment and what are its objectives. See, disinvestment is nothing but the process of selling the government shares in an enterprise, particularly a public sector enterprise. A government will decide to sell its shares in a company for two reasons. One, to raise revenue for the government, and second, to exit inefficient and loss-making public sector units and introduce economic reforms which will promote market discipline and competition. In this case, the editorial says that the government is selling its stakes in these companies not to introduce economic reforms but to raise revenue for the government, which will strengthen its public finances and reduce the widening fiscal deficit. See, in a market-based economy, disinvestment is encouraged in order to help the government to exit a loss-making PSU. Even under the new public management theory of public administration, it is encouraged for a government to reduce its involvement in non-essential and non-strategic areas. This means that it is not the business of the government to fly an airline. It is not the business of the government to run hotels. It is not the business of the government to manufacture watches, because these are non-essential, non-strategic areas which can be easily taken over by the private sector. So under the NPM theory of public administration, government should act as a catalyst. It should be involved in critical areas, in strategic areas. For example, oil and energy in the case of India, nuclear, railways. These are the kind of areas where the government should be actively involved. So if a government decides to disinvest its shares in such public sector units, then it can be seen as an economic reform, because it will help the government to exit a inefficient or a loss-making PSU. It will help the government to promote market discipline and competition. It will help the government to enable the private sector to take over such non-essential, non-strategic areas. It will also help the government to promote the theory of NPM and as well as introduce good governance. But if a government is disinvesting its shares in a strategic area, and if a government is disinvesting its shares in a profitable company such as BPCL, then it is being done purely for the sake of revenue, which is just an ad hoc measure or a stopgap measure to bridge the widening fiscal deficit. The reason why the government is resorting to such an ad hoc measure to bridge the fiscal deficit is because there has been a huge shortfall in the collection of tax revenue as compared to the budget estimates. In the budget, the government had estimated that it would raise a tax revenue of around 16 lakh crore rupees. But we are already in the third quarter of this financial year, and the net tax revenue has hardly reached 37% of the estimate. Same is the case with the proceeds of capital receipts as well. The revenue realization through the proceeds of capital receipts has fallen way short of the budget estimates. So as a result, the government is staring at the possibility of breaching the fiscal deficit by a huge margin. Along with this, government spending has increased drastically, mainly because of the stimulus that the government has been forced to provide in order to boost economic growth. Recently, the government announced a massive tax cut for the corporate sector in order to revive economic growth. Along with this, the government has increased its expenditure in order to promote economic growth, and as a result, the gap between revenue and expenditure is widening. So as a result, fiscal deficit is increasing, and the government is staring at the possibility of breaching its fiscal deficit targets by a huge margin. Now, what will happen if the fiscal deficit target is breached? If the fiscal deficit target is breached by a huge margin, then it will have the potential to destabilize the economy. Because when fiscal deficit increases, the government will be forced to increase its borrowings. If the government borrows more, it will introduce more money supply into the market, and this could trigger inflation in the long term or in the medium term. Apart from this, the credit rating, that is the sovereign credit rating, could also be affected. So that's the reason why a fiscal deficit target has been laid out under the FRBM Act or the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. See, in the budget itself, the government had made an allocation for the proceeds of disinvestment in order to meet its fiscal deficit target. In the budget, the government had laid out a target to raise around 1 lakh crore rupees in revenue through the proceeds of disinvestment. But till date, it has only realized around 17,000 crore rupees. See, the problem is not with the disinvestment that has been designed to raise revenue and strengthen public finances for the government. The problem arises when the disinvestment is carried out in a profitable company such as BPCL, which is also holding strategic oil assets abroad. So that's the reason why the editorial says that the disinvestment of government shares in such companies is just an ad hoc stopgap measure to bridge fiscal deficit, and such a decision is not based on sound economic logic. Now let's take up a column from page number 10. This column evaluates the recent judgment of the J&K High Court, which has declared the Beggary Act as unconstitutional. The writer applauds this decision and he calls it a blow against punitive constitutionalism. See, before independence, the colonial government had this practice of treating certain communities and certain sections of the population as criminals, or it was treating them with suspicion just because they did not fit into the narrow definition of being civilized according to Western standards. So if the colonial government felt that a certain community was not civilized enough, then it would bring laws which would criminalize them and stigmatize them. The best example for this would be the Criminal Tribes Act. This legislation basically treated the tribal community as criminals from birth. The same perspective was applied by the colonial government for beggars as well. It brought a number of beggary laws which declared begging as a criminal offense in the 1920s. Unfortunately, even after independence, we have carried forward some of these legislations, and this is the colonial hangover which continues to affect the Indian polity. By drawing inspiration from these colonial laws, the first Beggary Act was passed in post-independent India in the state of Bombay in 1958, and subsequent legislations have been extended across India. Last month, the J&K High Court passed a landmark judgment, and it has struck down all these legislations which had criminalized begging, and it has declared them as unconstitutional for the following reasons. Under these anti-begging laws, begging had been provided a very broad definition. It covered anyone who did not have a means of subsistence. It covered anyone who was wandering in public spaces and seeking alms. Basically, these legislations were discriminatory towards the poor people, and it would also target nomadic communities which move from one place to another without any sustainable means of subsistence. For example, we have few nomadic communities amongst Gujars and Bakarwals who move from one place to another without any means of subsistence. Even they could be classified as beggars under the Beggary Act, and they could have been arrested. This is the second draconian provision of the anti-begging laws in India. They provide for the arrest of beggars without any warrant. And once arrested, they will be placed in these beggar homes, which are the so-called correctional facilities, which actually function as detention centers. The Beggary Act also had a provision which mandated the authorities to cleanse the beggars once they were arrested by subjecting them to a medical examination, shaving, bathing, and a change of clothes. This provision is actually against human dignity because the intention of this provision is not to transform the beggar. Its intention is not to prevent him from committing crimes. Instead, the only intention of such provisions is to clear the public areas of beggars and ensure that they are cleansed. Unfortunately, the government defended this legislation during the recent hearing by stating that the objective of the legislation is to transform the beggars into good citizens and maintain public order by preventing them from committing crimes. The government even submitted to the High Court that the legislation is helping the authorities to prevent beggars from annoying tourists. These justifications that have been provided by the government is exactly similar to the criminalization and stigmatization of certain communities under the colonial government. So as long as you're not a normal person according to the definition of the government, then you can be mistreated and your dignity can be compromised by the state. It is this argument which has been upheld by the High Court of Jammu and Kashmir. The J&K High Court has said that being poor or begging is not an act of individual failing. It is not the individual who has failed. Instead, it is the failure of the state. It is the collective failure of the state which has resulted in poor people taking up begging as a means of subsistence. The J&K High Court has said that if poor people are forced to take up begging in a society, then it means that the safety net, the social safety net, which was supposed to catch them, has failed. And it is the responsibility of the state to create this social safety net. So if poor people have been forced to take up begging just because they do not have a means of subsistence, then it is not the failure of the individual. Instead, it is the failure of the state. It is the government which has failed the society and its people. Then the High Court has also said that if the government is preventing a beggar from seeking assistance in public, then it is basically curbing his fundamental right to freedom of movement, which is enshrined under Article 19. Because a beggar who is seeking assistance in public, he is doing it in a peaceful manner. He is not affecting public order and he is not resorting to any violence. So the High Court has ruled that the right to wander and the right to seek assistance in public falls under the right to movement or freedom of movement that has been enshrined under Article 19. Plus, the High Court has also ruled that the treatment that was provided to beggars under this legislation was against human dignity, which violates Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So by making these historic observations, the J&K High Court has struck down the Beggary Act and it has declared it as unconstitutional. So the writer applauds this decision of the J&K High Court and he calls it a blow against punitive constitutionalism. So we need to understand what is punitive constitutionalism. This is nothing but the punishment that is offered to individual rights for the collective failure of the state. And this punishment is enabled by the law itself or by the constitution itself. So punitive constitutionalism is nothing but the punishment offered to individuals through the legal system itself for the collective failure of the state. The examples for this includes the laws which denies political participation to individuals who do not possess basic minimum educational qualification. It also includes those laws which deny the benefits of socio-economic welfare programs to those couples who have more than 2 children in the name of population control. See, on the face of it, these legislations are appearing to create a system of incentives and disincentives in order to promote a desired socio-economic outcome. It appears that these laws are trying to promote a basic minimum education criteria. They're trying to promote population control measures. But in reality, in the name of achieving these larger goals or larger interests, these laws are basically snatching away individual rights when it is not the fault of the individual, but it is the collective fault of the state. See, in a rights-based democracy, it is the duty of the state to ensure that all the citizens have equitable access to good quality education, healthcare, food, nutrition, and livelihood. So when an individual is forced to take up begging, then it is not his individual failure, but it is the collective failure of the state. So for this reason, a person who is begging, he cannot be treated as a criminal. It is this argument which has been upheld by the J&K High Court, and it has struck down the anti-begging laws in India. It has declared them as unconstitutional. Now let us take up the practice questions. Avian botulism, which was recently responsible for the death of hundreds of birds at the Sambhar Lake, is especially predominant in the North American wetlands. Option B is the correct answer. See, the Great Lakes, which are present on the US-Canada border, they are highly susceptible and vulnerable to avian botulism. Now let's take up the second question. Which colonial legislation introduced diarchy in India? The correct answer is option C. It was the Government of India Act 1919, or also known as the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, which introduced the concept of diarchy in India. This question has been asked because we have a small article on page number 11 which mentions Lord Chelmsford. It was on this day in 1919 that Lord Chelmsford assumed the Viceroyalty of India. He basically assumed the office of the Viceroy of India. Now let us take up the third question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Comptroller and Auditor General of India is a constitutional authority established by Article 148 of the Indian Constitution. The reports of the CAG are taken into consideration by the Finance Ministry. He has the same status and salary as that of a Supreme Court judge and cannot be removed except by impeachment. Amongst the three given statements, statement 1 and 3 are correct. The second statement is incorrect. So option D is the right answer. Because see, the CAG presents his report to the Parliament, not to the Finance Ministry. And within the Parliament, the reports are taken into consideration by the Public Accounts Committee of the Parliament and as well as by the Parliamentary Committee on Public Sector Undertakings. These are the two parliamentary committees which will look at the CAG report. And yes, the CAG has been set up under Article 148. The office is a constitutional authority. He has the same status and salary as that of a Supreme Court judge, and he can be removed only through the process of impeachment. This protection has been provided to the office of the CAG in order to ensure that the office functions in an independent manner from the government. This question has been asked because we have an article on page 13 wherein Prime Minister Modi has called upon the CAG to adopt modern technology in order to increase the efficiency of auditing. The Prime Minister has highlighted the role of the CAG in improving the efficiency of the government. He has highlighted the role of the CAG in checking wasteful government expenditure and corrupt practices. That's one of the reasons why Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had referred to the office of the CAG as the most important constitutional office. Now let us take up a map-based question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Sambhar Lake is considered as India's largest inland salt lake. It is located in Punjab. It has been designated as a Ramsar site. The second statement is incorrect. Statements 1 and 3 are correct because the Sambhar Lake is located in Rajasthan. So amongst the given options, the correct answer would be option B, 1 and 3 only. Please look at the map. This is where Sambhar Lake is located. It is located in Rajasthan and it is the largest inland salt lake of India. Now let us take up a practice question from the 2016 prelims paper. Which of the following are the indicators used by the International Food Policy Research Institute to compute the Global Hunger Index report? All the three given indicators are a part of the Global Hunger Index report. Along with these three indicators, there is a fourth indicator as well, which is child wasting. So amongst the given options, option C would be correct. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, evaluate the law on beggary in India in the context of the recent judgment of the J&K High Court. The second question, how does avian botulism affect water birds? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post them in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.